Hello everyone. The Indian Medical Association of Queensland has been running a public health lecture series since March 2020. Our members, who are doctors of Indian origin and practice in this wonderful state of Queensland, they volunteered their valuable time and expertise in this endeavour. The advice given by any doctor is of general nature and meant for information and education only. Please note, this is no substitute for your own healthcare professional, and everyone is advised to consult with their own treating physician for ongoing health issues. I will now ask the Secretary-General of IMA Queensland, Dr. Cyril Fernandez, to introduce to you our guest speaker of this month.
Hello listeners, welcome to another episode of Aap Ki Shehath, meaning Your Health program of the Indian Medical Association of Queensland. IMAQ has doctors, general practitioners and specialists as its members. Today we have as our guest speaker Mr. Giri Sivaraman, who is the principal lawyer at the Maurice Blackburn lawyers in Brisbane, Queensland. Our viewers has given a few questions for Giri Sivaraman to clarify, highlight and enlighten us doctors on legal aspects related to this present COVID situation. Let me introduce to you Mr. Giri Sivaraman. Welcome Giri to our Aap Ki Shehath program.
Thank you for having me.
Giri leads the employment law team for the Maurice Blackburn lawyers in Queensland. Giri has been recognized by the Doyle's Guide as the preeminent lawyer for employees in Queensland for the last 4 years. He has represented doctors in a variety of employment and disciplinary issues. Maurice Blackburn is a leading personal injuries firm in Queensland, representing injured workers and victims of road traffic accidents. Maurice Blackburn lawyers closely work with general practitioner doctors and specialists to ensure the best outcomes for patients who are the victims of accidents. So my first question to Mr. Giri Sivaraman. Giri, are there any laws at the state or federal level that mandate vaccines, for example, in relation to workers in certain industries?
Yes, Cyril, there are. Part of the problem has been that each state, territory and the Commonwealth are doing different things, and I think that's led to a lot of confusion. The Commonwealth government mandated vaccinations for people that work in aged care, and that took place about a month ago. The Queensland government, of course, has now mandated vaccinations against COVID for employees and contractors, which is obviously important for doctors who work as consultants, if they work in an area that provides care, which will be many health professionals. Victoria has passed laws describing a whole number of different types of workers to be authorised workers, and they have to get vaccinated. Just a day or two ago, Western Australia passed laws mandating vaccinations for a whole range of workers, ranging from health workers to FIFO workers. And so it really does depend on where you're practicing and what you do. But for those of us in Queensland, if you're a health worker, a doctor in healthcare in the state system, or you're in aged care, then you'll need to be vaccinated.
Yeah, that's thank you for that. My second question, for the benefit of our viewers, doctors and others in the communities, Giri, if there is not a legal requirement that anyone be vaccinated, are there any circumstances in which an employer would be able to force an employee to get the COVID vaccine?
The short answer is yes. An employer can direct an employee as long as that direction is lawful and reasonable. It's never going to be unlawful to direct someone to be vaccinated. The question will become, is it reasonable? And that requires an assessment of how they're managing risk. But generally speaking, if an employer issues a direction, the onus is going to fall on the employee to show it's unreasonable. In the context of a pandemic that's highly virulent, that's very dangerous, If your job involves any kind of contact at all with whether it be other people or the public, I think it will almost certainly be seen as reasonable for the employer to direct you to be vaccinated. There are going to be very few jobs, and certainly none, I think, associated with your members, where a direction wouldn't be lawful and reasonable.
Yeah, that sounds good. My third question is, could an employer require employees to undertake COVID rapid tests at their workplace under the supervision of a registered general practitioner doctor?
I think they would. There's a series of cases over the last year that involve COVID-related directions where workers challenged and lost. So there's a case where the employer said to the worker, you need to tell us your travel history. We need to know where you've gone. Employee refused, was dismissed, lost. There's a case where the employer said you need to have your temperature read before you go into the workplace. Employee refused, lost. There's a case where the employer said you have to work in a particular area, you can't interact with people in another area. The worker interacted with someone in the other area, was dismissed, challenged the case, lost. There's been a couple of cases where the employers mandated influenza vaccination, so not yet COVID, but influenza. Worker refused, was dismissed, challenged, lost. So I just think if you look at the cases where all of these challenges have failed, something like rapid testing is going to be seen as a reasonable direction and a reasonable way to manage safety.
That's good to know. My next question is, Giri, if a doctor who is self-employed is forced to isolate due to COVID infection and or being a close contact of a person who has COVID infection and loses his income, what is their recourse?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Cyril. And that's a very difficult position for doctors, isn't it, who are self-employed. There's a difference between if the doctor contracts COVID as opposed to having to isolate because of having been in contact with someone who has COVID. If they've contracted COVID, even if they're self-employed, it may be the case that they've either purchased insurance themselves or, many people don't realise this, but at some point if you've contributed to a superannuation fund, you've almost certainly bought some form of insurance, and you may have bought income protection insurance. And so it doesn't matter that you're not working in the place where you contributed to super, as long as you've still got some money in that super fund, you probably have that insurance benefit. And so if you've contracted COVID, you should look at your superannuation insurance to see if you've got income protection for the period of time that you can't work. If your business can't operate, it might be that you have purchased business interruption insurance, and that may be accessible if the business interruption is due to an outbreak, a disease outbreak. But the one issue is I don't know if any of these will cover the situation where you are just being told to isolate, which is not necessarily a whole business having to stop or due to an actual health issue. So that's where there might be a gap in protection. I think it's still worth investigating whatever insurance options you've purchased, but just be aware that insurers will fight hard, and you may want to get some advice.
Yeah, thanks for that. And my next question, Giri, is if a worker contracted COVID infection in a work context, would they be able to make a workers' compensation claim? We see a lot of workers' compensation claim for injury and things, you know. That's, can you please highlight on that, Giri?
That's a really good question. So this is the thing, there are all these people that are complaining or wondering about whether or not they can be directed to be vaccinated. But this is the other end of the spectrum. What happens where someone gets a disease because someone else isn't vaccinated? There were a series of cases like this in the 90s in Queensland involving Q fever in meatworks. And there were cases where a couple of people who got Q fever said to the employer, you were negligent because you didn't mandate vaccinations against Q fever.
Wow.
And so, and in two of those cases, they were at least partially successful. So if you get COVID in a work context, you may well be able to make a workers' compensation claim. And in fact, there was a case in New South Wales just a week or so ago where a worker who died because of COVID got his family got a really significant workers' compensation benefit because he contracted COVID arising out of work.
That's valid information. I'll move to the next question. Does an employer have the right to ask an employee whether they have got the vaccine, whether they had the COVID vaccine?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because that's actually sensitive medical information, and of course I'm sure that all of your members are well aware of privacy issues and sensitive information. You can only collect sensitive information from employees if they consent and it's reasonably necessary. However, there is an exemption, an health emergency exemption, which has been applied in some cases where the employer is obtaining COVID-related information because of the fact that the pandemic is a health emergency. So you probably can, but it will depend on the context.
Thank you. If a worker is fired because they refuse to get the vaccine, do we think that's likely to be treated as a valid reason in an unfair dismissal context, Giri?
Looking at the cases in the last year where people have been fired for refusing the influenza vaccination, none of them have succeeded. They've all lost. And all the challenges at court to mandatory vaccinations have lost. So I think it is actually going to be quite difficult for employees to challenge a vaccination. The only carve-out might be if there's some particular health reason, some strong health reason, and if there's been a failure to consult. There has to be consultation before the direction.
Last but not least, can we talk about whether an employer mandate that a person be vaccinated strays into indirect discriminatory territory?
Yeah, so that's where if you set a condition, you say everyone must meet it, but a person says, well, I can't actually meet that condition because of a health requirement I've got, that's where it can be indirect discrimination. So possible, I think it will be very rare, and as all your members know, being doctors, the actual reality of people being unable to get vaccinated against COVID because of health reasons, and you know this better than me, Cyril, but from what you've told me, it's very rare. So I think it's unlikely to arise.
That's good. Thank you, Giri. So viewers, hope you got good information from our Maurice Blackburn principal lawyer, Giri. So on the COVID context, let's say, Giri.
Thank you.
Thank you, viewers.
Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Indian Medical Association, we thank you so much, Giri.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Right here.
Real
Bye.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the November episode of Aap Ki Shehath presented by Cyril Fernandez, and the guest speaker this time was Giri Sivaraman from Maurice Blackburn solicitors. You can listen to his own segments as well on Australian Indian Radio as well. In fact, next one will be on Monday. So ladies and gentlemen, if you too would like to have your segment on the show, you're quite welcome to contact Rajni and she will arrange a suitable time slot and make all the arrangements for you. So ladies and gentlemen, this has been a Australian Indian Radio live streaming of Aap Ki Shehath, brought to you by the courtesy of Indian Medical Association of the Queensland chapter, for which we are thankful to them. Until the next episode, it's goodbye from us.